25 greatest Texas lawyers of the past quarter century by Texas Lawyer. He's a constitutional scholar who's argued before the United States Supreme Court, testified before the U.S. Senate on constitutional issues and the House, and has recently won 3 state landmark First Amendment and religious liberty cases. Since 1997, he has served as president and CEO of the Liberty Institute, one of the major sponsors of the Values Voters Summit. In fact, could we just take a moment and look at your monitors to learn just a little bit more about Liberty Institute?
For 40 years, Liberty Institute has been on a mission to defend people's freedom. We battle in the highly contested arena of issues surrounding religious liberty across America. Decades later, we are still protecting the rights of Americans to express their faith openly and without censorship.
There are groups in this country who are well-funded, they've got great lawyers, and their objective is to remove God from our public life.
As a nonprofit organization, we at Liberty Institute specialize in defending religious freedom. Liberty Institute works with everyday people who've been thrust into the headlines when in most cases they're simply trying to exercise their faith.
It's hard for folks to be able to stand up and take on some of these big challenges, and so that's why Liberty Institute's there. But we can come alongside them, whether it's a person or a community, and we can stand with them and defend their religious liberty.
We work with the best attorneys in the country, including 24 of the top 50 law firms in the nation. They take these cases in their community, volunteering their time for some citizen who is now under attack.
No one is immune from this fight for religious liberty, and our opponents have no shame, they have no respect, they are vigilant about going after everyone who ever displays anything that has to do with faith.
If a government takes away religious liberty, then all of our freedoms are in jeopardy.
Sometimes people ask the question, what can I do? You can do a lot. Make a decision to get involved. Support Liberty Institute with your prayers, financially, and by simply sharing this information with other people. We can't do it without you.
All it takes for evil to triumph is for a few good men to do nothing.
Together, we can win this battle.
Our next speaker is not running for president. He is the president of Liberty Institute. Would you please welcome Kelly Shackelford.
Liberty Institute is the largest legal organization in the country that focuses exclusively on religious liberty in the United States. And when you see a child like Giovanni Rubio, a 9-year-old that's told that he can bring any book he wants to read in his school unless it's his Bible, those families don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to go and hire a great legal team. So that's why we're here, to make sure that they have the very best. Because that victory is not only for Giovanni and his family, it's a victory for your children and your grandchildren and the future of this country. Now, how did I get involved in this kind of work? Back when I was in high school, I knew my gifts were in analytical thinking and speaking. And I thought, well, I either need to be a pastor or a lawyer. And people said, that's a God or Satan choice, isn't it? And as I looked, I thought, I'd probably make a better lawyer than I would a pastor. And so I went to law school and still had a heart for ministry and finished law school, clerked for a federal judge. And when you do that, you sort of research and write opinions and help the judge. And you know what it's like on the other side of the bench and what persuades and what doesn't. So all the big law firms liked that experience and had all these wonderful offers. I sat in my little federal clerk's office and I thought, I think I would suffocate if I went and did the regular law thing. I just don't feel that's what I'm called to do. And I remember thinking, well, what do you want to do? And I thought, well, I want to use my legal skills. I feel like I've been shown I should do that, but I want to help pastors and churches and religious freedoms and our founding principles. And I'd even like to go to seminary part-time. And I laughed because there was no job like that in the United States that was going to pay you any money. And then 2 guys called me with major law firms, never met these guys. And they said, will you go to lunch? And I said, sure. And they said, look, we started donating our time for religious freedom. We're now getting so many calls, it's hurting our ability to make a living. So we were wondering, would you be willing to come on and do legal cases and help pastors, churches, religious freedoms, and our founding principles? And you can even go to seminary part-time if you want to. Now, being a little immature in my faith in my 20s, I said, let me pray about it, like that wasn't an answer to prayer. The next day when I realized that was an answer to prayer, I started. That was almost exactly 26 years ago to the day. And sometimes we talk in crowds and, there'll be people who aren't people of faith. And the question they naturally ask is, religious liberty is what Liberty Institute does. Should I care about this if I'm not a person of faith? The answer is absolutely. The founders called religious freedom our first freedom because they understood if you lose religious freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms. And in fact, if you think about the one thing that totalitarianism can never allow in any society when it takes over, it can't allow citizens who hold an allegiance to one higher than the government. So whenever you see this totalitarianism seeping into a society, the first flashpoint is always religious freedom. So we have to ask ourselves as a country, how are we doing on religious freedom? Well, I can tell you, as a guy who's been doing this for over a quarter century, I have never seen anything like the levels of attacks I'm seeing right now in our country. And you know this. We've got pastors' sermons that are being subpoenaed. We've got a Christian clerk who just went to jail. We've got clients who are simply college students that are being told that they have to take their cross necklace off because, quote, it might offend someone at the school. 26 years ago when I started, the idea that we'd have to represent churches, I would have said, this isn't the Soviet Union. We don't represent churches in this country. Now, every week, we have to represent a new church that's just trying to be a church, just trying to do their ministry, just trying to do what religious organizations do. So things are very much under attack as never before. And I think most of you realize this. We do a survey every year. This is of all the attacks around the country on religious freedom. And it is incredible. I mean, this goes to everything from a high school student who was literally told that she would be, quote, incarcerated if she mentioned God in her valedictorian address, all the way to senior citizens who were told that their federally funded meals would be taken away because they were praying over their meals and that would violate separation of church and state. It's in every part of society. There's no way you can avoid this. And look, examples. Let's take schools. I'll just take you some cases that we've done just in the last year and a half. One was students were told to pull out a sheet of paper and write Jesus in big bold letters, and then to put that on the ground, and then they were told to stomp on the paper, to stomp on Jesus. One student wouldn't do it. He picked his paper up, he put it on his desk. He was thrown out of his class, he was suspended from school, and charges were brought against him before the disciplinary of this college before we got involved. Think of the girl who just was punished this last year for saying, God bless, and bless you when somebody sneezed. Think of the 5-year-old girl, Gabriela Perez, who was actually stopped from praying over her meal in the lunch cafeteria and actually was forced later to pick in a lineup because nobody was coming forward as to who did it. And eventually that person ended up having to apologize and the school ended up apologizing. But 5-year-old girls shouldn't have to defend themselves for praying over their meal. Take the military. 5 years ago, we didn't even have a division for religious freedom in the military at Liberty Institute. Now, there are a huge number of cases that are happening, and because of that, we've had to have a full division just for the military. Many of you have heard about the attacks against veterans memorials around the country. The Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial, a cross that was put up in 1934 by the hands of World War I vets, only to have 70 years later the ACLU bring a lawsuit and say, you have to tear this down because we don't allow crosses on government property. It was just a lone cross that on the bottom said, for the dead of all wars. It was put up by guys who weren't even very religious. They just wanted to remember the sacrifice of those that they served with. Now, while that case was on appeal, unbelievably, the court ordered that it be covered. I want you to see a picture of what the court ordered be done to that memorial, that cross. It was covered in a bag with a chain around the bottom and a padlock at the bottom. Now, you look at that picture and you think, what country is this in? It's in the United States of America. Now, some of you will say, hey, I know that you went to the Supreme Court and you got that reversed and that bag is off, that memorial is back up, and you're exactly right. But we won that case 5-4. You change one justice, and that picture is the law in the United States of America. And at least you think, well, at least these attacks on veterans memorials are over. No, we have cases all over the country. In fact, not too far from here, we have the Maryland Peace Cross. This was put up, we're getting close to 100 years ago now, by not only the American Legion, but by mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And now there's a lawsuit by the American Humanists that this has to come down. And we're defending the American Legion and making sure we are not going to stop until that cross remains standing and there for all of our veterans. Now, the problem is these attacks aren't just against symbols. It's occurring within the military as well. Many of you know the Sergeant Monk case, which will be talked about later and in our breakfast tomorrow morning. But a lot of you have heard about the Chaplain Motter case. Chaplain Wes Motter, a hero. He's been in the Navy 19 and a half years. Not only a chaplain, but a chaplain to our special forces, like the SEAL Team 6 and our soldiers. He was deployed 14 times overseas, loved to counsel and loved to love people and help them. And that's what he did. And then just 8 months ago, had a couple of sailors that thought, hey, we don't like what he believes. So they asked him what he believed about marriage and what the Bible said about sex outside of marriage and homosexuality and some of these issues. And he gave a good answer as any Assemblies of God ordained minister would give. And the next thing he knew, his captain was coming to him and saying, you're now relieved of your position, what's called detached for cause. And in fact, he was going to be scheduled for a board of inquiry to kick him out of the Navy. His career was over. So we filed a legal action to get this overturned because this is against the law. Amen. Chaplains have every right to minister in accordance with their faith. And every step of the way on every appeal, he was denied, and we knew this was going to take many years in order to come to a victory. Well, you know what? We were wrong. 3 weeks ago today, we won a complete reversal. Chaplain Motter had a total victory. Chaplain Motter is not only back in service as a chaplain, but he is also was just told, pick where you want to go next, and his next assignment will be San Diego, California. Now, the problem is we've been watching these cases. Just in the last 2 years alone, there's been a 133% increase in attacks on religious freedom. And this was before the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage. Since that decision in our office, the number of requests for legal assistance in cases has increased by over 400%. Where we were getting 15 calls for cases a week, now we're getting 15 a day. This is, and you heard, oh, well, this marriage thing won't affect anybody else. Well, in the oral argument itself, there was admission that, well, what about tax-exempt status? If you're a tax-exempt organization, how can you be engaged in federal discrimination against this new constitutional right when you believe marriage is a man and a woman? How can you be on the air as a ministry or as a minister and have an FCC license when you're engaged in discrimination against this new federal constitutional right? And it's even coming into people's employment. We now have a whole number of cases of people who have lost their job, not because of anything they've said or done at work, but simply because of what their beliefs are on marriage and where they go to church. One of our recent cases, Eric Walsh, is a tremendous man, director of public health, was hired by the state of Georgia to be in charge of a whole region of the state, until some people complained and said, you need to look at his church and what he believes about marriage. We now have copies of the emails from the government officials divvying up his sermons from his church and then firing him the next day because of what he believes about marriage and the Bible. I want you to understand this. This man was fired not because of anything he did or said at work, but because of what was said in his own church on a Sunday. These are the kind of attacks. Now, some of you are saying, boy, I'm glad that the value voters brought the depressing speaker in to tell me about all the bad news. So let me tell you the good news. The good news is that we have a method of dealing with this, and it's working. And that is, if you look at the nonprofit legal organizations that are out there, they do the same thing. Raise as much money as you can, hire as many attorneys as you can with that money, and then put them in D.C. or New York and fly them around the country and do as many cases as you can do. That's not our model. Our model is there's all these people who went to law school because they're people of faith and they wanted to do what was right. And 30 years later, these are the best attorneys at the best law firms in the country, and they've done honorable work, but they've never gotten to do a case for their faith or their country. We go and we find those attorneys and we say, look, if we give you everything you need, are you willing to give your time? They said, you know, I've been waiting for 35 years. Sign me up. And we know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen when we give them one of these cases. For the first time in their life, all their talent and their gifts and their training is lined up with their faith and their love for their country. It's kind of unfair, but we now know that we have them for the rest of their lives as one of our volunteer attorneys. And they give cover to all the younger attorneys, and they get to work on these cases. And so we now have over half of the top 50 law firms in the country, not just donating their time, but fighting each other over who gets to donate their time on these cases. The result of that is twofold. First, on an average case, for every $10,000 we spend, we get $60,000 donated. We're literally multiplying the resources by people who are giving in themselves. But number two, which you didn't expect, is the results of this method. If you watch the nonprofit legal groups, you'll find that they'll win a case, lose a case, win a case, lose a case. 50-50. Maybe if they're really good, they're 60-40. Our win rate now using this method for 12 years in a row has been way above 90% win rate on our cases. So I just want you to know that we can win this battle. We're winning these battles. The question is, are we going to be willing to stand? Let me show you something really quickly that I think will encourage you. When we started winning all these cases, and we were just a state group at the time in Texas, we said, you know, I think we need to go national. This need is great across the country. But the problem was, if you look at this slide, we were beating the ACLU every time. But the problem is we had $3 million and they had $117 million, and we couldn't be everywhere they were. So we said, we're coming up with a plan. And we came up with a plan. We're going to grow very fast. We're going to go from $3 million to $5 million to $7 million to $9 million. And I'll tell you, that's exactly what's happened. We were at $3 million, we went to $5 million, we went to over $7 million the next year, and then right under $9 million this last year. We've almost tripled in 3 years. This is why. Let me show you some slides. This was all of our supporters when we started. They were all from one state, Texas. Look at just a few years later at what's happened as we said, is anybody interested in this around the country? People all over the country are joining this army because they want to do something and make sure that we preserve our religious freedom for our kids and our grandkids. And let me show you what this has done in cases. The next slide is when we started and we said we got to go national. These were our cases. Just 2.5 years later, I want you to see, because of all this new support, where we're able to do now. And that's just the beginning. We're going to cover this. We're going to cover this whole country. I wish there wasn't a need for this, but we're going to cover this whole country to make sure that everybody has the attorneys they need to make sure that our Constitution and religious freedom is protected everywhere across America. Now, let me tell you, I need your help on something. Are you going to be willing to stand up when these things come to you? And I hope you'll be willing to be our ambassadors. We just came out with these religious liberty protection kits. And these are going to be free. You can go to our booth or else, and it'll tell you what you need to do as a church if you're going to have your religious freedoms protections with these oncoming battles that are coming, or your ministry, or if you're in the military, or if you're in the schools. We answer all these questions so that people are armed and empowered with the rights that they do have. And I hope you will take these back and share these with other people. But I really want to leave you with one main encouragement, and that is we're told all the time that we're just one person. You can't make any difference. The reality is it's the one person that almost always makes the difference. So I want to end with a story. This is a story about a bunch of cheerleaders, a bunch of 14, 15, 16-year-old girls. What power do they have? But they were tired of kill and mash the other team on their signs. So instead, they said, what can we do that's encouraging? And one of them said, Scripture's encouraging. So they started putting on their signs with their money, their paint, their materials. That's how it worked at that school. Things like, if God is for you, who can be against you? And you can do all things through him who gives you strength. Well, everybody on both teams loved it, especially the other team, because they weren't saying kill and maim the other team anymore. Until a letter comes from Madison, Wisconsin, from the Freedom from Religion Foundation saying, you stop these girls from mentioning God or we're going to sue you. And the next thing you know, the superintendent was announcing over the loudspeakers, if anybody mentions God at the football game, they're going to be punished. Well, we had to come in and represent these girls, and the short end of the story is we won their lawsuit. And it's now at the Court of Appeals, and actually at the state Supreme Court. The ACLU has joined the school district and still fighting them. But I got to tell you, these 14, 15-year-old girls, they've been in the New York Times 4 times. They've been in the Wall Street Journal 4 times. They've been in the LA Times 3 times. And the last article there ended with a scripture verse, so I'm sure that reporter's been let go. They were on CNN. They live in a town with 2,100 people. Yet the last I saw, their Facebook page had over 60,000 followers. So I want to show you a very quick video, and then we'll be done, of what not only these girls have done for others, but what it has done for them when they've stood up.
How many people get the chance to represent such great ideas, How many people get the chance to really fight for these things? Because it's easy to sit on the side and say, man, I wish that would happen, and I wish we had that, and I wish they would do that differently. But how many people actually get to be the person to take action? This is something I'm going to be proud of my entire life. It's becoming part of who I am, realizing that what I say has value and worth, even on a national and international level. Little small town girl, it means something to people. They care. Because of everything that I've been through, I've kind of been exposed to this whole world of law and litigation that I would never have the opportunity to know about before. And because of that, I've discovered that I have a real interest in it. And now I'm like, I'm going to be a lawyer. Because I had people step in and basically be little knights in shining armor. Mr. Starnes and Liberty Institute come in and tell me, this is what's going on and this is what you can do to make it right. And I want to be that for other people. Something that's been our theme throughout this, it's been the base, the principle of what we're doing. I believe that sometimes people get sidetracked from is that it's about God. It's to God be the glory. It's for God. It's for him. The scriptures are from the Bible because that's what we believe and that's what we think we should live by. We know we should live by, and we want other people to have that same opportunity to live by those ideals and morals. If it hadn't have been for this case, it would have been a few thousand people that would have seen the scriptures, but because we have faced opposition, now the whole world has seen the scriptures. It's been exposed so much more, so we still have to give praise even through the hard times.
Did that give you hope? Now that gives you hope for the future with our young people. And that's exactly what's going to happen with our country if we're willing to stand. Thank you. God bless you.